What are the best decks to use in the OP02 meta? Let's talk about it. What's up, captains? Welcome back to The Other Decks. My name is Casual Adobo, and today we're going to be doing our OP02 Paramount War tier list. Now, as a reminder, I do have a couple of different categories than your traditional tier list, just to kind of make it a little bit more fun for myself, so interpret them as you will. But just as a reminder, these tiers are meta in all caps, less meta in all lowercase, kind of meh, and if you win with this deck, you are God tier. And if you remember last time, we did include the pinnacle of all tiers, the God of Jank. But in this set, we are adding yet another tier, and this one is called In Memoriam. As we get more sets and more decks, honestly, some leaders are just not worth the time to talk about. The juice is not worth the squeeze. What I'm trying to say is they're bad. They're bad leaders. In fact, they're so bad that they fell below the frame. And so now I'd just like to take a moment to take a moment of silence to remember them. So long, leaders. We will miss you. Alright, so before we begin, I do just want to mention that if you're looking to pick up singles for any of these decks, any of the leaders that we're going to talk about, I just want to let you know that I do have an affiliate link with TCG Player. So if you shop using my link, which you can find down below in the description, the channel will get a portion of however much you spend in your cart. No additional cost, and it is a great way to support the channel by doing something that you might have already been doing. So if you do use the link, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Alright, now with that out of the way, let's hop into the tier list. Alright, so let's start off with OP01, and I'll try and fly by these because if you've been playing the game for a little bit, you kind of know these leaders pretty well. So first up is Zoro, and Zoro is going to make a huge return in OP02. He's an aggro swarm-like deck who utilizes the new one-cost characters to his advantage. Thanks to new cards such as Curly the Dan, Zoro gets another searcher, who can then look for another searcher, which is kind of crazy. This searcher is also really good at finding your Makinos, your Sunnikuns, which were promos from the Uta pack, as well as OP01 with some relative ease. Obviously, he is very strong, and he easily makes it into the meta tier list. Alright, so next up is Law, and Law is a bit of an interesting case. In OP01, he was a bit of a fan favorite, represented well in many of the tournaments. However, he was quite a difficult deck to get used to, right? People who put into practice, I think, were rewarded. So for those who did put in the time and invested in Law, where does OP02 put you? Honestly, I do think safely in less meta. For the same reason Zoro is strong, Law is able to utilize even more cheap characters to fill his board. That was kind of his thing. And Vista provides another repeatable ability to Law to bounce back and forth, adding a little bit more control, kind of similarly with Yamato, even though it's not as clear-cut with Yamato. But overall, there is a lot more characters that can be used for some powerful control. Now, I would say that, the one weakness it does have is it is kind of susceptible to removal from black and red decks, and also in the sort of mirror match, or kind of mirror, but green does also have the ability to control your board. And I think what makes this the biggest difference between this and something like Zoro, who kind of uses similar cards, Law doesn't have any natural way to boost the attack of the characters you have on the field. So for those reasons, I can't really put him into the higher tier. Next up is Red Green Luffy, and honestly, I might be surprised with how well this could do with the new green Straw Hat support. However, I don't think I can reasonably give into that hype, even though I really want to. The leader's ability is still pretty expensive, and you also still only have 4 life. So, expensive ability, low on life. I'm kind of putting him in meh initially, But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see him kind of rise up the ranks just a little bit. Maybe get into the less meta territory. because I think people and players are interested in seeing Red-Green Luffy succeed. Alright, next up is Odin, and honestly, another easy one for me. He's going to go into meh. I'm putting him under Red-Green Luffy, mostly because I do think that there's better green leaders available, either in the starter decks or in the OP02, that we'll get into all of that. But just better green leaders that can use some of those Wano cards. Alright, so Dofi's fun because he was a very popular choice in the English meta, maybe just North America specifically. But for some reason, we really love Dofi. We saw him in a bunch of tournaments, but I think that Dofi does fall into the less meta tier. Mostly because I think people are honestly going to still push to make him work, but I don't think he's the best blue leader for OP02. I'm going to put him like solidly behind Law, just because I don't really see the potential in Dofi for this set. He didn't really get any specific support in here. He got some 7 Warlords, but it was clear that Ivankov, the new OP02 leader, got way more support for the blue stuff in OP02. Alright, next up is Blurple Crocodile, aka Blue Purple Crocodile. Meh. Purely because it's popular for some reason. It's very defensive, but I do think that in this meta, which is very like swarm oriented, I think the defenses are going to crumble a little bit. So just going to put him in meh. Alright, now getting into the starter decks, let's talk about Luffy, and this is the one that I use in my Treasure Cup run, that I use in OP01, and unfortunately I think Luffy falls to just meta, less meta, right? I think players who played him in Treasure Cup will stick with him, especially if they're doing the online regionals, just because of the timing of everything. However, there isn't like really great direct support for him. I mean, he's good, right? Luffy is a good generic red leader, but I think he does need some specific support to operate. Otherwise, you're kind of just doing red things, right? And for what we get in OP02, I just think that some of the other red leaders handle it a little bit better. Next up is Kid, and this is easily meta, all caps, all punctuations, all exclamation points. Kid's ability is just really, really good. And in OP01, people were already playing the sort of Supernova's Wano combo, and the Wano side of Kid is now even stronger. Honestly, there's still some pretty serious debate whether or not this leader or Kinemon is the better green mono leader, but we'll kind of discuss that later. Alright, next up is Crocodile, and unfortunately, I'm calling him meh. Cost is still a little bit steep for bounce ability, and in a meta where the top decks are really swarming with pretty low cost characters, I think the one question you're going to have to decide is the leader ability going to feel like it's worth it to bounce back, you know, a 1 cost Sunny-kun? I don't know, especially since your opponent can just replenish their board. Like, you really need to capitalize on that moment that you bounce the characters back in order to gain an advantage on the board. And for that reason, because it is a little difficult, I'm going to call him meh. And then next up is Kaido, and I do think that Kaido still has a place in the meta just because if it hits, it hits. Now, one of the things that we saw in OP01 was that Kaido was powerful, but it wasn't consistent, right? And that's why we didn't really see too many tops with him. I mean, we saw him in like, you know, top 8s, top 16s, etc., but we didn't see him win an event, right? In fact, the deck that seemed to win the most, based on the loose kind of following I was doing of it, seemed to be Kid, and that really just shows the power of consistency. Now, I do think that Kaido fixes some of his own consistency issues by using the Impel Down package in combination with some of the Animal Kingdom Pirates package, because Impel Down is purple, one, and it does have its own searcher, which is pretty nice. But still, the deck entirely relies on seeing Onigashima and being able to utilize that to, you know, cheat out more Dawn per turn. So that's why he is less meta. Alright, so now let's get into some of the new stuff, and I'm going to start off with the new Navy Star deck, Sakazuki. Alright, so honestly, I had to fight so hard not to put him in the In Memoriam tier right off the bat. I'm pretty down on Sakazuki, to be honest. However, it does get the award of being the first, if you win with this deck, you are God tier. And listen, I know I've been saying the Sakazuki thing's bad thing, right? But honestly, it's not that bad of a deck. You can run most of the standard black cards like Sakazuki and Kuzan, but honestly, I'm just not a huge fan of his ability. It is mid at best. like you need to rest Dawn to KO something at 0 is honestly a little bit too specific, a little bit too much Dawn that can only be used one way, and honestly you're just better off using, you know, another black leader. And then finally, let's get into the actual leaders you can find in the OP02 set boosters, starting with Whitebeard. Now, Whitebeard is such a unique leader, right? He naturally has 6k power and starts with 6 life, so that really changes the battle math pretty significantly, right? Most opposing leaders are going to need to save at least 1 Dawn just to even swing into Whitebeard, right? But the big drawback is his effect. End of turn, lose a life, put that card into your hand. And so you're really giving yourself a ticking clock. And with such a large drawback, why am I putting it in meta? In all caps. Honestly, it's because of the supporting cards, right? Marco is such a sticky blocker once you go down to 2 Dawn, or 2 life, I mean. Jozu is both a 2k counter and a last minute rusher if needed. And the character Whitebeard can actually, you know, help prevent some of that life bleed. But honestly, the biggest card that Whitebeard gets in this set is a stage card Moby Dick. So if you have 1 or less life, all Whitebeard pirates get plus 2k power, and that's honestly a different kind of pressure that you can apply onto your opponent. Now, where does he go in the meta order? I'm going to put him right behind Kid. I think Zoro is the better red deck in the meta, and while Whitebeard does have a good matchup into Zoro, I do think that the other sort of meta decks that it'll face, it kind of struggles against, right? And if Zoro can put on enough pressure, get enough attacks in, I think Zoro can have a really good shot at Whitebeard as well. So it's not like an overwhelming, you know, matchup. And then thinking about Kid honestly has too much control in green and too much attack. 2 swings at 12k, kind of wild. But I think this is a respectable placement for OP02, and honestly he's only going to go up as we go into OP03. So keep a lookout on Whitebeard. Alright, so next up is Garp, and I'm going to be honest, I think me and my friends like Garp like way too much. In fact, we have a secret group among our locals called the Garden of Garp. Are we trying to start a Church of Cherubi thing from the Digimon scene? Maybe, I don't know, we'll see what happens. Do you like the Garden of Garp? Let me know in the comments. But I do think that Garp can honestly catch people off guard. We didn't really see a whole lot of coverage of him, and to be honest, in the Japanese meta, he didn't do that great, to be honest. He's a black and red leader, 5k power, 4 life. But anytime you attach a Dawn to a leader or any of your characters, you can give an opponent's character -1 cost, as long as they're a 7 cost or less character. Now, I think the reason why it didn't do so hot is because, honestly, red and black don't have great synergy together, and it's a little bit difficult to build this deck. I think there's a couple ways you can do it, but honestly, there are some key cards that you can utilize. For me personally, and I'll do a deck profile on this later, so once that goes up, you'll actually see it up here in the corner, so check it out once it's there. But I honestly build this mostly Navy, using both Kobes and Sakazuki to combo with Garp's cost reduction ability, and then KOing some, you know, of my opponent's characters, controlling the board a little bit. And Secret Rare Kuzan helps to hit the larger characters because it'll put an auto -5 on them, meaning that all cards should be affectable, able to be affected by Garp's ability. And really, I'm only teching in red cards using things like the starter Nami, which I think is a fantastic addition here, as well as Brook to get some of that Dawn flexibility, allowing me to use Rested Dawn to attach to my characters, which, for the record, still counts for Garp's effect. And now I get to get more usage out of my abilities. Now, am I going to go as far as to say that he is meta? No, but he's certainly a tier below it, right? And honestly, I would think that he is a great candidate for OP02's rogue deck of the set. Is that an official award? I don't know, but I like it. I like Garp, and for those of you who are kind of catching my drift, seeing what I'm putting down, welcome to the Garden of Garp. Alright, next up is Kinemon, and Kinemon is OP02's green leader, mono green, and honestly he's pretty solid. Activate main once per turn. When you have 1 or less characters in play, reduce the play cost of the next cost 3 or higher Wano Country type character card you play from your hand by 1 during this turn. So that was a lot of words, and in fact, I was starting to run out of steam, if you couldn't tell, but let's talk about the actual practicality of that, right? So if you go second, on your turn 1, you can actually put out an Okiku for 2 Dawn as opposed to 3. Now that is kind of wild. And then if you combine this with the new Yamato card for control, the new Odin who can reactivate himself to swing again, you have a pretty scary list of cards on your field. So for those reasons, this deck is definitely meta, for sure. Honestly, between this and Kid, many have been arguing about which one is better. And for me, personally, I do think it is going to be Kinemon, right? I think this meta favors swarm decks where things are able to cheat out other characters to get extra value. And for that reason, I am going to give it to Kinemon, right? Because he does exactly that. The added attacks of Kid, you know, they're nice. They're obviously nice. They add a little bit of pressure. But Kinemon's ability to cheat out characters with some really amazing effects, I think that's the biggest part of it. But that adds so much value in this meta. Alright, so next up is Sanji, and I think I'm going to put him in kind of meh. Unfortunately, I love Sanji, but it's not quite there, right? There's a ton of support for this, which is cool, with the film Straw Hats, as many of their effects can also cheat out other Straw Hats who are vanillas, right? And the extra 2 Dawn can be used to either swarm the board more or use event counters later, adding a little bit of a defensiveness, right? The thing is, it just feels a little clunky right now, and honestly a little bricky. Admittingly, I've only played a handful of games with the build that I had, and I'm not even sure if I've settled on that build, so maybe it just needs a little bit more play testing, but honestly, I'm not really sure if Sanji is currently worth the time to build and master. So, I'm putting him in meh. Ivankov, on the other hand, is definitely worth the investment to build and master. In my opinion, Ivankov is the blue deck to use for this meta. It's interesting because it does have a new form of aggro that favors discarding cards from your hand in order to get 2 more from your deck at the end of the turn, thanks to your leader ability. It has a good searcher in Buggy that can find other impel down cards. And the whole point of this is to really find a character Ivankov, and then a character that can be cheated out with Ivankov's effect as fast as possible, right? In most cases, you're going to be looking for Blue Luffy, aka Bluefy. And this Bluefy is cool because it can bounce a target back to hand while also gaining double attack. And it's cool because that is both an on-play effect as well as a when attacking effect, which is nice to kind of control the board, maybe remove some really annoying blockers, right? And then I guess I should note that just because the on-play gives it double attack doesn't mean you can actually swing with it when you play it. But anyway, toss in some 9-drop Mihawk into this deck to help with the sort of larger targets, and now you have yourself a pretty solid deck. With that being said, I am going to put it right behind Whitebeard, mostly because the line of thinking for most Ivankov decks is pretty simple, right? It's pretty easy to know what your opponent's going to do. You know, cheat out Bluefy, force blocks, keep smacking them until you win. It's pretty simple. Now, if your opponent can handle that is an entirely different thing. But honestly, with the amount of removal we have in a lot of the sort of upper echelon, higher tier decks, plus numerous blockers, it's kind of fairly easy to hinder Bluefy, especially against the more what I would consider meta decks. Alright, and now it's time to come to Magellan. And I feel bad for Purple, man. Mostly because for 2 sets in a row, they've gotten a monocolor leader sent straight to the if you win with this deck, you're God tier. And once again, it's for the leader's effect, right? Once per turn, you can add plus 1k power to your leader if a Dawn was returned to the Dawn deck. Now, it was clarified by judges that this also accounts for when your opponent returns Dawn to their Dawn deck, but still, the fact that it's only once per turn is kind of rough. Honestly, if this operated sort of like Garp, where it wasn't once per turn, this would be a much better leader, 100%. And the purple Impel Down cards are inherently not bad, right? But Magellan just isn't a good leader. Alright, so last 2, and we're going to talk about Z. In a similar way to how I've been sort of championing Garp, I think Z has some great potential once someone figures it out, to be honest. All of the dual color leaders in this set are honestly really just fun. And he has a great ability where, when attacking, you can Dawn -4 to KO a character that costs 3 or less, and then give your leader plus 1k power. So, bonus power plus removal for 4 Dawn? It's kind of brilliant. Now, I can sing Z's praises all day long, but why am I only putting him in less meta? And I think it's because he's matchup dependent, right? I personally think that Z's ability with the other black cards that can reduce costs, really works well against decks that want to put out sort of bigger bodies. I would put, Ivankov in this one because it has to play that 7 cost Ivankov as well as a 6 cost Luffy. Other fellow black decks are also in danger, even purple to an extent, but it really, in my opinion, doesn't work well against decks that flood the board, right? So your Zoros, your Kinemons, you gotta ask yourself, right? Is Dawn -4 worth it to remove, I don't know, a Makino, a Curly the Dan, right? Any of the 1 cost characters that Zoro's gonna play? And then you're gonna be asking yourself that question a lot. A lot. And that's why I made the decision to put it into the less meta category, just a tier below some of those other decks. Doesn't mean that it's bad. It can get wins. It can win tournaments. We saw that in Japan. It's just a little bit harder to do it. And then finally, let's get to Smoker. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm a little high on Smoker right now, right? I think that with all of Black's defense and removal, Smoker has a good shot at taking the meta by storm. And also, I think that players, specifically in maybe the North America region, I think players are excited by the Navy decks, and they really want to push to see if one can work. Similar to how people push Dofi, right? And while I still think that Zoro and Kinemon will be the decks to beat, I do think Smoker is going to be up there with them. So this is kind of my meta call. I think that Black is going to have a lot more representation in our English format. So for me, clear, easy call to say, he's meta! And there it is. That is my tier list for OP02. I do think that the top 3 decks are going to be Zoro, Kinemon, and Smoker. But this is more of like an early meta prediction, and I do think that things are going to shift a little bit as we go further into OP02. But wait! You might be saying to yourself, what about the last deck? The deck that's going to be the God of Jank for this set. Now, originally, I wasn't going to make one. I know, that sounds crazy, as the guy who made Self-Destruct Kaido. But honestly, I was going through the card list and nothing was really calling to me. But as I scoured through, I finally found him. The aura of audacity shone brighter than I'd ever seen on any other card. And then I saw his ability and the damage he could inflict. I really only could think of one word. Ruinous. That's right. The God of Jank for OP02 is none other than Brindy World. 8 cost to play, 8,000 power, but activate main Dawn -8. Give this character plus 792,000 power for the turn. Yes, that's right. He can swing for 800,000 power. Counters? What counters? But a good himbo ability alone does not make for God of Jank. No, what makes this thing the God of Jank is the absolute emotional roller coaster you go on when you play him. Think of those highs, wielding that much power in your hand, only to be completely and utterly foiled by a cotton candy loving reindeer. He sure can get you that game at times, but he'll certainly break your heart more. And that is an Oscar award winning tragedy right there. So Brindy World, congratulations on your God of Jank title. Thank you for taking us on a journey. And if you enjoyed this journey through the OP02 meta, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. What deck are you piloting this set? Who is your God of Jank? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see more OP02 content, be sure to check out this playlist. As we make more deck profiles, more gameplay, this will become more and more packed. Thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. And captains, remember, build what you like, play what you love, and I'll catch you in the next video.